CNBC host Aaron Sorkin got into a screaming match with Rick Santelli. Or maybe I should say that the opposite way. It was more Rick Santelli screaming at Aaron Sorkin, but, it got heated either way. They don't like each other, it looks like, and they went back and forth aggressively. So, of course, the topic is COVID and the lockdowns. Let's take a look.
Rick, I just wanted to just highlight something that the background of this whole discussion comes with what we're seeing in terms of COVID cases. And we're seeing, maybe stimulus, but we're seeing calls for not necessarily closing things down, but certainly there are some calls to closing down, except for the politicians themselves. But for their constituents, they're talking about, they need to be much more careful. We're hearing, right?
Yes, no, believe me, I believe in careful. And when I point out governors cheating, it's not for the hypocrisy which exists. It's the fact that I think many of these governors are intelligent people, and they love their families, which they've taken out into restaurants. Therefore, there is actually and should be an ongoing debate as to, why a parking lot for a big box store like by my house is jam-packed. Not one parking spot open. Why are those people any safer than a restaurant with plexiglass? I just don't get it. And I think there's a million of these questions that could be asked, and I think it's really sad that when we look at the service sector and all the discussions we've had about job losses, that particular dynamic isn't studied more, isn't worked more. We don't put more people in the room and try to figure out ways so that these service sector employees and employers could all come back in a safer way. You can't tell me that shutting down, which is the easiest answer, is necessarily the only answer.
Rick, I just as a public health and public service announcement for the audience, the difference between a big box retailer.
Who is this?
Hold on. The difference between it's Andrew.
Who else?
The difference between a big box retailer. Hold on. The difference between a big box retailer and a restaurant, or frankly even a church, are so different. It's unbelievable. Going into a big box retailer,
I disagree.
You're wearing a mask.
You can have your thoughts, and I can have mine.
You're required to wear a mask.
I disagree.
It's science. I'm sorry. It's science. If you're wearing a mask, it's a different story.
500 people at a Lowe's aren't any safer than 150 people in a restaurant that holds 600. I don't believe it. Sorry. Don't believe it. And I live in an area where there's a lot of restaurants that have fought back and they don't have any problems. And they're open.
Okay. You don't have to believe it, but let me just say this. You're doing a disservice to the viewer because the viewers need to understand it.
You are doing a disservice to the viewer. You are. You are.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I would like to keep our viewers as healthy as humanly possible. The idea of packing people into restaurants.
I think our viewers are smart enough to make part of those decisions on their own. I don't think that I'm much smarter than all the viewers like some people do.
Can I get in here, please, and get back to the jobs report?
How's that working out for you, Rick? How's it all working out for you? I mean, look at the numbers, Rick.
It's working out fine.
I think the numbers, Rick, belie. Rick, the numbers show that the idea of let it rip has not worked all that well.
And people are getting sick and dying.
I understand all that well, Rick.
I just think the way we deal with it isn't necessarily optimal. I think if we spent the rest of the show talking about this, there would be no agreement. So let's move on.
Yeah, that was intense. So there's a lot to say about this. I mean, these are the debates that are going to go on ad infinitum now because, like I said, we're kind of doing the worst of all worlds in terms of how we're responding. And so these debates are inevitable. So the point that Rick Santelli's making, and by the way, he is probably the most annoying man on the planet with how obnoxious he is. He's saying, well, it makes no sense that big businesses are like favored and they get loopholes and then small businesses are getting crushed. He's saying, like, I feel for the small businesses. And then Aaron Sorkin jumps in and says, well, hold on now. But there are differences between big box retailers, a small restaurant, and like a church. Like there are nuanced differences, and some businesses it's more dangerous to keep open, and others it's not. I mean, just to give one example, like if you're sitting outside and eating, that's a lot safer than sitting inside and eating. So a restaurant that has the ability to have people eat outside, it could make sense to keep that open. But a restaurant where you have to eat inside, you don't have the ability to eat outside, that it actually makes sense to close. So, like, are there differences? And is it a nuanced thing? Of course there is. And that's why we make these distinctions between, necessary businesses and ones that are not necessary. And sure, there's like a gray area as to what is necessary and what's not, but we all agree that there are different categorizations of things that it's relatively safe to stay open and things that it's not safe at all to keep open. Bars, for example, are the worst example. Like if you're indoor bar, it's like, woof, you're going to spread COVID in there like nobody's business, especially at a time like right now with these numbers. So like, are there differences? Yes. The point Rick Santelli is making is more, I get what he's saying because he's trying to say from a principled perspective, you are giving favorable treatment to the bigger businesses over like the smaller businesses, and that's unfair to the smaller businesses, especially because they can't weather the storm. And so, yeah, the principle of like, should we open or should we close? It's the same whether it's a small business or a big business. You're still having the conversation of should we open or close, and to give them special treatment or favoritism, and then have the veneer of like, oh, it's only about health and safety. Well, no, in the case of with our government, no, there are plenty of, exemptions and loopholes because there's corruption and because the big businesses have like paid for those loopholes. And I mean, just look at the response with the CARES Act. Look at who's getting the PPP money. It's mostly big businesses, the giant corporate bailouts, and then they turn around and fire their workers anyway. Yes, there's favoritism. Yes, there's corruption. Yes, the wealthy are making out like bandits and regular people are getting absolutely crushed. Now, listen, what I described to this point, that's all the case. But then the question becomes, well, what do we actually do about it? And I would like to hear what both of them have to say, because I'm curious what they think the solutions are. Again, my guess is a guy like Rick Santelli leans on the side of like, just keep everything open. It's freedom. We know it's a disastrous situation, but we're compounding it and making it worse for people economically. It's better to have the health problem, but have the economy open than have the health problem and have stuff closed. Like if you're going to have the health problem either way, why not have the health problem, but also keep everything open? You know what I mean? I think that's his argument. But I mean, the childish aspect of that one is, well, then you're doing like no virus mitigation stuff. And of course you need to, which is why the responsible conservative position is more like, okay, keep most stuff open, some closures, because you can't avoid some closures, but you have to mandate universal masks. You just have to do it. You have to do that, and you have to mandate social distancing. You have to have very basic rules, because that actually, it's been proven. There's studies on this. You could save hundreds of thousands of lives in the case of the U.S. just with that alone. So that would be the responsible conservative position. I don't know if he's being responsible, because I didn't hear him say anything about masks, really. But I don't want to strawman him. Maybe he does believe that, and he just didn't say it, or I didn't hear it, whatever. But that would be the more conservative, the responsible conservative position. And then you have Aaron Sorkin, and what I would say to him is, okay, so he seems to be more in favor of shutdowns, or at the very least, targeted shutdowns, right? Like he's trying to make the distinction between, it's different. All these things are different, and you have to look at them on a case-by-case basis. All these different places where you go are different. Is the church the same as the bar? Is the bar the same as, whatever, fill in the blank. But yeah, what I would say to him is, if you're going to advocate for the shutdowns, there is no way around it. You have to either advocate for wage replacement, so temporary nationalization of wages where the government pays anywhere from 70% to 100% of your wages. You have to advocate for that. Or you have to advocate for some form of universal basic income and recurring stimulus payment. It's one or the other. If you shut down, you have to pay people. You have to. You can't shut down and then not give them relief, because then eventually the bills come due and they haven't worked because you said they can't work. So you have to. But again, they didn't really touch that part of it. See, that's why they were just kind of screaming over each other there, and which is probably why it went viral, because they're just heated and yelling like a bunch of idiots. But like, you got to get to the core of it. And my guess is at the core of it, there's somewhere in the ballpark of that conservative position and that leftist position and or liberal position. And yeah, I mean, honestly, both of those things are solutions and are better than what we're doing now, but we're in the worst of both worlds. We're doing the economic shutdowns, so limiting economic freedom, but there's such half measures that it's still not really mitigating the spread of the virus. So it's like you get the downsides of the giant explosion in the virus, but then half measure shutdowns which don't actually curtail it. So you get the economic issues and you get the health issues. It's just worst of all worlds. And I feel like I don't know what their actual positions are if you let them explain it in detail, but my guess is they both be for some degree of some sort of half measure that would still be a mess like we're currently witnessing. So it's really tough watching all this stuff because you can see how our government is basically just totally inadequate and they have no idea what they're doing. And then you see like Australia hasn't had a case in such a long time now, and they're out there having festivals and concerts and partying, and it's just like, wow, are we really that pathetic? The answer is yes.